What's up, YouTube? It's Slide 8 Fry here. This is long overdue. I had mentioned in a previous reaction video, I forget which one it was. It might have been when I was late to reacting to the Super Mario movie trailer, or it was a different one before that. Anyways, I had mentioned I was going to react to a particular video by a YouTube channel called Moon, and it's because he's talking negatively about Nestle. Now, it seems a lot of people are not aware of how truly evil Nestle as a company is. They just are like, oh, Crunch Bars, Butterfingers, yay. Yeah, okay, well, they're a very, very, very evil company. Forgot to put this down next to my, down here. Okay, there we go. Anyways, a very, very evil company. Their CEO, and I remember seeing this years ago, said that he thinks all the world's water should be privatized. The fact he says that clearly means he wants to own the world's water supply. Nestle does make water. Now, if you can't help yourself and you want to eat a goddamn Nestle treat like a Nerds, yeah, the Willy Wonka company that's was made based off of the Willy Wonka movie, yeah, that's Nestle actually. Um, DiGiorno pizza, that's Nestle. Nestle has their hat and everything. Coffee Mate, that's Nestle. I mean, they proudly put Nestle right there on the container. Um, Hot Pockets, Nestle. Wish there was a legit competitor. I've seen like a pretzel pocket from another brand. I enjoyed it, but my wife did not. She's like, "Give me Hot Pockets." I'm like, I don't want to buy a Nestle product. I'm giving money to an evil corporate machine. I don't want to give them my money. Nestle had tried to harvest water in sacred land where it was illegal to do so, and the only thing that stopped them were a bunch of protests. Like a bunch of protests blocked them from doing so. Like they are a really evil company. But what Moon's about to say might include what I was just saying now. Um, but anyways, I'd also like to mention I was first introduced to this channel a couple months ago, I think. I believe it was a video about Jeff Bezos and how horrible he is, and I think we all agree he's greedy and corrupt as hell. I later saw one about Bill Gates. I felt kind of sad seeing that video existed, just because he runs a charity now too, but he's there's yeah, I watched the video. There's some pretty messed up shit about him. Um, I'm sure he'll do Elon Musk at some point. He's got it. He hasn't done it yet, but I'm sure he's going to. Because yeah, that guy's. I, I know people love that the Tesla vehicles are more fuel or more energy efficient and less polluting, and he wants to start the SpaceX thing to get us to Mars. But um, the problem is he's not doing it because he cares. He does it for himself. He cares more about his ego than anything, and he realizes if he's helping others, it just improves his ego more. Um, I mean, it'd be good to get us to Mars, but I just wish it was somebody who actually did it because he cared about getting us to Mars, not because he wanted to show off. And there's other things about Elon Musk that are actually a lot worse than what I'm saying. He did one for Mark Zuckerberg. That makes sense. That guy doesn't even seem human anymore. And he also does analysis of movies about how they tried to warn you of what's going on. Like the Truman Show tried to warn you. By the way, if you have any means of watching the Truman Show, watch it. It's really fascinating. But the fact that it tries to warn you, I mean, is it a fact that it tries to warn you about what's going to happen in the future? Maybe. It does kind of feel like corporations are controlling everything, and it's almost like we're living in a reality show. Anyways, let's get to it. This one is Nestle's War on Children, October 1st. I wanted to record this reaction a lot sooner, but I had a lot going on, and actually more recently I have something horrendous going on that I don't want to get into. I might mention this horrendous thing on my social medias, Facebook, Twitter, but I'd like to focus on the video now.
Nestle is engaged in a brutal war with children, and yet almost no one knows the full extent of this war. From Nestle convincing parents to poison their babies, to cutting off water supplies to using child labor to make chocolate, Nestle's been exploiting children around the world for years. However, it wasn't always this way. In fact, Nestle began as a simple chocolate company, but after decades of growth, thousands of brands, and an ever-increasing empire, and Nestle is treading down a very dark path. It's gone to the point that Nestle is now sourcing its cocoa from over 2 million child laborers. And according to the former Nestle CEO, water shouldn't even be a human right. So
yeah, I was mentioning that. He said that water, the world's water supply, he said that it should all be privatized, owned by corporations. He said that. That's what I was talking about. Shouldn't be a human right is literally the same thing as it should be privatized, owned by corporations. It's fucking horrible.
why is Nestle acting in this way? Why is Nestle waging a war with children? And how could they get away with it? Well, the truth is that for the last 70 years, Nestle has been playing a game of cat and mouse. There have been countless protests and boycotts against Nestle. They've been marketing baby formula to children under 6 months old, causing a massive spike in high mortality rates amongst children. And yet, having said all this, proper retribution for these crimes still eludes them. And to understand why, we need to understand how this descent started in the first place. You see, during the early 1900s, Nestle had built their empire on the back of a few key products. One of their main products was chocolate, and they were making bank from chocolate just before World War II. However, with World War II around the corner, and Nestle was running out of space to expand into, they had to branch out more. If the company didn't do anything, they would completely stagnate and fall behind their competition. And so simply put, they needed new markets and new products to keep the profits flowing in. And luckily for Nestle, this was just around the time of globalization. After the Second World War, countries were beginning to open up their doors to Western business. So if you were a company looking to expand and all these new opportunities were coming up, you'd be a fool not to take them. New markets would mean more demand for your products as well as new supplies for your factories. In short, it was a no-brainer. But what products could you bring to these new places around the world? Well, after the Second World War, a new sense of optimism was taking hold, and this feeling was especially strong when it came to children. So all the better if you could tap into this feeling. This new growing market of humanitarianism was the perfect gap in the market to fill, and so Nestle would brand themselves as a child-friendly company, designing lots of their products to be consumed by children. They even made themselves new cartoon mascots like Quickie the Nesquik bunny. And so using the money they had gained from their chocolate factories, Nestle would come to dominate the baby formula industry. This would become one of Nestle's flagship products, and it still is to this day. So if you could supply baby formula to starving children all around the world, everyone would be happy, right? Well, the only problem was that your baby formula wasn't all it was cracked up to be. In fact, Nestle's formula wasn't at all sufficient for newborn babies, and recent studies have confirmed this, but in a masterstroke of planning and propaganda, this didn't matter, because Nestle had been buying favors in the medical world for years, and the public perception was at an all-time high. The public already loved their chocolate, they'd made a killing from the war, doubling their sales and supplying food to troops and civilians alike, and because of all of this, Nestle was gaining a reputation as one of the great defenders of children's health. The only problem was that Nestle's baby formula was leading to malnourishment, illness, and death, but because their marketing campaign was so effective, it made the public and medical world blind to this. In the 1940s, one Swiss journalist even remarked, Nestle stands with its products alongside the Red Cross in its magnificent crusade for destitute childhood. And so with this great global propaganda campaign, combined with a growing corporate empire, and Nestle was in a perfect position to establish themselves as a global company, a multinational giant. And because of this, Nestle now had free reign in these new developing markets all around the world, and it was here that they would begin their war on children. The first stage of this war was to exploit a populace uneducated about baby formula and its risks. It didn't matter that people would eventually wake up to the truth about their product, as long as the money kept rolling in. And people would discover the truth pretty quickly. One activist was already hot in Nestle's heels. A 1939 talk by Cicely Williams showed that even before Nestle's practices were widespread, they were known to cause the death of children. In her speech, she said, quote, "Misguided propaganda on infant feeding should be punished as the most criminal form of sedition, and those deaths should be regarded as murder." But if people were becoming aware of the awful crimes that Nestle were committing, and the grave dangers of their baby formula, why didn't the public care? Well, simply enough, that back back then there was not enough recognition for Williams or anyone else's work. Because back then Nestle was working with governments and big businesses around the world to suppress the truth. And Nestle's massive project to buy the medical industry had seen to that. And so from the 1950s onwards, the company would be engaged in a constant battle between going to war with children and censoring any of the public backlash. It was a race against time before the truth broke out internationally, and so Nestle needed to gain as much power and money as possible to prevent the repercussions of the truth. And so at first, due to the enormous pressure from its investors and owners to increase Nestle's profits, Nestle would begin ramping up their medical propaganda outside of the borders of Europe. They would go all in on influencing medical professionals to promote their products, with medical professionals around the world
What
and
happened?
entire clinics receiving large
Sorry, that was weird. What is my computer doing? It shouldn't be doing that. There shouldn't even be a problem. My internet is over a gigabyte of speed, so that doesn't make any sense. That was weird. I might have to lower the video quality just to make sure it runs a little better. I don't know why it's doing it. It's probably just because of how old my computer is. It has nothing to do with the internet. My computer is, I previously said it was 5 years old. It's actually, I was incorrect. I meant to say 6 years old. And sometimes it really shows. Sorry.
large gifts of cash or supplies from Nestle, and with these gifts came free samples of their baby formula. The implication was obvious. Nestle was around the all in on influencing medical professionals to promote their products, with medical professionals around the world and entire clinics receiving large gifts of cash or supplies from Nestle, and with these gifts came free samples of their baby formula. The implication was obvious. If you recommend our formula, the funding will always keep coming, and in almost all cases this worked perfectly. In Nigeria, for example, the average clinic was receiving up to 8,000 free cans of baby formula each year for promotions. The reason behind this was clear. If mothers saw that doctors and nurses were using Nestle's baby formula, they would then be much more likely to make the switch, especially if their doctors and nurses were recommending this to the population. And so if doctors around the world are promoting Nestle's baby formula over breast milk, it would be almost impossible to ignore this. Without any other information on the topic, you might just think that why should you give your baby your own natural healthy breast milk when Nestle's chemical formula is recommended by your doctor? Eventually the propaganda became so deep that these free Nestle samples would also be given to mothers by what were called milk nurses. These glorified salespeople would hang around maternity wards, hospitals, and even people's homes. There they would give mothers free samples, hoping to get them hooked on Nestle's formula. But marketing wouldn't be enough for Nestle. As they expanded across the world, they needed more profits. Because by now, Nestle was a huge multinational conglomerate, and with its huge size came a bottomless need to make more money. And Nestle was facing the same issues that companies like Coca-Cola were. They had reached their market cap, and so they needed to expand to new markets. Which is why during the 60s, Nestle was busy acquiring tons of different companies in tons of different industries. Canned goods, ice cream, frozen food, and even water. It seemed like Nestle was well on their way to becoming a global power. It seemed like no backlash could possibly stop them. They would just continue to buy up more and more companies and exert their influence over more and more governments. And so to fund all of this, Nestle would need to squeeze even more money out of all of their products. However, because of this, the criticism was catching up to Nestle, and this would be the biggest thorn in their side. If people perceived Nestle to be an evil, anti-children company, that would completely destroy their brand image, and their increasing exploitation was gaining more and more publicity. So far, things had gone really well for Nestle. They were the darlings of the medical world, and so the company thought that they were unstoppable. It wouldn't hurt to go a little bit further than before, right? Well, the greed for profits won at Nestle. Any concern for the lives that they would ruin was fading fast. The rationale was simple: grow and take over the world, deal with the consequences later. And that is when the publicity finally caught up with Nestle. After Cicely Williams' criticism of Nestle back in 1939, other activists started learning the truth, and criticism for Nestle was slowly leaking out of Europe. And as the awful effects on children grew, it slowly became clear to doctors what the real cause was. Eventually there were too many sick and dead children to ignore, and so in 1970, the UN raised its first concerns about the industry practices, and 3 years later,
finally.
Nestle would face a tidal wave of negative publicity. In 1973, a document called The Baby Killers was released to wide acclaim. It detailed much of what we've already discussed, and placed the blame almost entirely on Nestle's shoulders. They showed that
Good.
Nestle's baby formula, taken in third world countries, led to babies being 6 to 25 times more likely to die of diarrhea. The truth was coming out, and this was one of the biggest threats to Nestle's entire existence. A child-friendly company marketed towards children was now being shown to be one of the most toxic things towards children. And so with the truth coming out, what would you do in Nestle's position? I mean, without the baby formula, Nestle's stock price would take a critical hit. And with major investments from companies and governments around the world, this just wasn't an option. So Nestle had to suppress the truth, even if it was a losing battle. And so the first thing they would do was sue the publishers for libel, despite not being able to say that any of it was false. Eventually Nestle won the case, but only because of the name Baby Killer. The court actually found out that everything else was completely true, but this didn't matter, as long as the critics were sued into the ground. And with the power of the world's best lawyers, Nestle could save face, at least for now, because these early losses weren't stopping Nestle's exploitation. In fact, Nestle would then begin the next phase in their war on children. They would ramp up their marketing even more and introduce new actions to sell their formula, each more evil than the last. And possibly the worst of these was to give mothers just enough free samples until they stopped producing breast milk. And when this happened, the mother was quickly stuck with the formula. They had to buy more or their child starved. Like a drug dealer, Nestle would give mothers their first free hit before milking them dry. If they stopped buying it, they were out of options and risked the health of their child. And these weren't the only negative effects from baby formula. Nestle specifically targeted poor communities with their formula marketing. And when there's poverty, there's more likely poor sanitation as well. Nestle's baby formula needed clean water to be safe. But did Nestle tell anyone when they gave out their free supplies or in their marketing? Well, of course they didn't. At least not in a meaningful way. There were written warnings on the labels, but their poorest, most at-risk customers couldn't actually read it. They were so poor they were illiterate, and they couldn't read the instructions either. But because the doctors and all the elites above them promoted it, they believed Nestle's marketing. In addition to not being able to sanitize their baby formula, their poverty also meant that families would stretch their supplies. This combined effect of poor sanitation and too little nutrients was often deadly for babies. Babies raised on formula rather than breastfeeding are much more likely to get diarrhea. They're more likely to get all kinds of infections and are even more likely to get sudden infant death syndrome. Recent studies have proved this, and this doesn't even factor in dangers from poor sanitation and malnutrition. Nestle didn't care, of course, as long as the money kept rolling in. But unfortunately for Nestle, the criticism towards their actions was reaching a breaking point, and in 1977, a massive boycott was launched in the US, severely damaging Nestle's profits and image. It started in Minneapolis in protest of Nestle's policies, and soon it would spread all around the West. From Australia to Canada to Europe, Nestle's sales took a massive dive. If they didn't do something soon, Nestle would completely collapse. And following on just a year later, a public Senate hearing shined a light on the true extent of Nestle's crimes. One senator asked a Nestle executive whether they should be held responsible for marketing baby formula in impoverished places. Places where there wasn't enough clean water and where mothers were forced to dilute the formula. And Nestle's cowardly answer was, quote, "We can't have that responsibility." When questioned directly,
I apologize. I was interrupted. Personal conversation between my wife and I. It is related to what I was describing earlier as a horrible thing that's happening to us with this apartment that I'm not going to get into on the video. I don't want to bring down the mood. If you do want to learn more about it, I do intend to talk about it on Facebook and Twitter, but I'm not going to post it in a video.
questioned directly, Nestle executives only gave fodder to an enraged populace. What should have been the final nail in Nestle's coffin came when the World Health Organization and UNICEF drafted a new code for baby formula marketing restrictions. It outlawed pretty much all the practices we've discussed, and very soon after, countries would begin implementing it into their laws. So of course Nestle would fight back. Their vice president called it unacceptable, restrictive, irrelevant, and unworkable. But it was too late. Corporate pressure inside the company, along with the investors, was doubtlessly high as well. All the negative press and boycotts were ruining the image of the company, whose whole persona was built on being child-friendly. But what mattered to Nestle the most were the profits they would lose from the whole scandal. And if you only care about maximizing profits, the best option was to play along for a little while. So Nestle stepped back from their practices. But this only really happened once the damages started to outweigh the profits. And in the long run, the fallout didn't really damage Nestle nearly as much as it should have. Throughout the 70s, while Nestle were taking hits for baby formula, they were ramping up their usage of child labor in making their chocolate. chocolate. And most importantly for Nestle, they were still making heaps of money. For example, in the early 70s, they also bought L'Oreal, a cosmetics company, and now today it's the largest in the world, making over $30 billion in revenue in just 2021. But unfortunately, Nestle was not going to stop their war against children. There were a bunch of new countries and regimes looking to bolster their struggling economies through whatever means necessary. So when Nestle came looking for sources for the booming chocolate business, lots of countries were eager to supply their needs. But Nestle and their competitors were in a position of power in the arrangement. The monopoly that they and other large chocolate manufacturers held on international cocoa meant that they could charge whatever they wanted. Cocoa was relatively cheap in the 1940s, and so Nestle and other members of the monopoly made sure it stayed that way for decades to come. So imagine you're in this position. You've got the power to make all sorts of exploitative deals with your suppliers. Cocoa isn't very cheap either when you factor in the import costs and taxes. At the same time, the ever-hungry board members and shareholders are demanding profits. And even when you broke the rules before with baby formula, it didn't hurt the company in any meaningful way. In fact, the baby formula was a huge success. All of this meant that there was no real incentive for Nestle to give their farmers and suppliers fair deals. And there was definitely no incentive to ask questions about how they can afford to sell you cocoa so cheap. So to fill the demand for incredibly cheap cocoa, farms across the developing world paid their workers incredibly poorly and sometimes not at all. But the worst aspect of all of this was that many of these farms didn't just use functional slave labor, they used child labor as well. The vast majority of these suppliers were small family-owned businesses. It was at these farms in impoverished locations around the world where children were expected to toil in the fields, often getting paid nothing or a very minuscule wage. A lack of regulation and outside attention meant that this way of doing things went on for generations. But things couldn't stay this way forever. These small farms weren't as productive as Nestle would have liked. Soon, demand for cocoa started to outpace the supply, especially once Nestle got the world hooked on chocolate. By the 70s, there were major changes on the way. Prices were skyrocketing, the world was in an economic downturn, and Nestle and many other companies were forced to increase domestic prices. But this still wasn't enough to keep pace. In 1971, cocoa was around $500 per ton. By 1977, they had increased by over 1,000% to over $5,000. Nestle's shareholders were desperate to lower these prices. So what would you do? Your company's already deep into child slavery, and you need cheap cocoa, so why not double down? It hadn't backfired yet. In response to the increase in demand, suppliers needed more cheap workers, and often that meant more children. The family farms were still running, but larger farms using children trafficked from nearby countries started cropping up, and these practices were most prevalent in the Ivory Coast and Ghana. These two West African countries produce the vast majority of the world's cocoa, with the Ivory Coast alone making up 35% of the globe's production, and the farms of both of these countries often have trafficked children working on them. Tricked into working on the farms through promises of money and education, these children often never see their families ever again. Instead, they work 14-hour days of hard manual labor. The machete is the most common tool on the farm, used to cut cocoa pods from trees and to extract the beans. And so physical injuries and scars are just as common as the psychological ones. And Nestle didn't bat an eye at all. They would just ignore that their suppliers were enslaving children to work in these dangerous conditions. Everything was fine as long as the beans were cheap. This sorry affair continued for years, and as the 90s came and went, child slavery would only ramp up. But as it became more prevalent, people started to catch wind of this. In the year 2000, a BBC documentary documented the abuses in the Ivory Coast. They estimated there were 15,000 child laborers at the time, but the figure was likely much higher. And then more and more documentaries, articles and exposés would pile up. As the farms relied more and more heavily on child labor, the issue only became harder and harder to ignore, especially with big names like Nestle being involved with this. However, at first, this didn't matter too much, because the governments in Africa were reluctant to interfere with one of their largest exports, and a 2008 report showed that progress was slow, if non-existent, in solving the issue. The number of child slaves just kept growing and growing, but as pressure was beginning to mount, Nestle was being forced to act. Having been boycotted before, Nestle couldn't risk the fall of its empire. However, this time it wouldn't be like before with the baby formula. They weren't going to introduce any grand changes in Nestle's policy or international laws. Instead, all they would do is make one of their popular chocolate bars, the Kit Kat, fair trade. When Nestle announced that Kit Kats would now be made with fair trade cocoa, it seemed like the first step in the right direction. Giving a fair price to the farmers meant they wouldn't be incentivized to use child labor. But
Kit Kat bars are confusing to me because here in the US, except at like certain candy stores, like If I go to like a Safeway or a Target or something, the Kit Kat bars are from Hershey. Huh? All right. Well, anyways, that's off topic. Kind of threw you off with that one, I'm sure.
But in the end, this was all just optics. The whole purpose of this Kit Kat deal was to get activists off Nestle's back, but the rest of their chocolate wasn't acknowledged at all. So while Nestle
Okay, I've actually never heard of Aero or Toffee Crisp. I know what Baby Ruth and Crunch and Butterfinger are. I mean, when I was a child, I used to like the Crunch a lot. Butterfinger, I would sometimes like it, sometimes didn't. I don't know. Butterfinger was like inconsistent to me. And then Baby Ruth, I think I had that a couple times. But I had never heard of this Aero and Toffee Crisp. I literally never heard of those. But I'm sure they're popular. Um, oh man, it's just really messed up. It's even worse than what I had already known about Nestle. Like I've known for quite some time that Nestle is an evil company. I don't know how long, like eight, 8 or 9 years I've known this, but it was mostly because of how their former CEO or president or whoever said that water shouldn't be that water should be privatized. Like, and Nestle, does water too. So it's like, yeah, probably because you scumbag, you want to own the world's water supply. The sad thing is that most people are just really ignorant to how truly evil this company is, and they just love their products so much that they don't choose to boycott them. But yeah, if you've been wondering about Nestle, are you gonna consider, boycotting the product? I know these chocolate bars are kind of hard to resist, but there's chocolate bars from their competitors. You can get one of those instead. Um, I mean, you don't need to get a DiGiorno pizza. There's plenty of goddamn pizzas you can get from the grocery store. Um, yeah, the Hot Pockets one's a little more difficult. There's not really much competition at all for that, but there is something. Those pretzel pockets I mentioned, which are not by Nestle. I forget what the company was called. They're a much smaller company. Um, yeah, and even the Willy Wonka company, made inspired by Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That's Nestle. Everlasting Gob, the Gobstopper, Nerds. They're the Willy Wonka chain of products, but it's owned by Nestle. It's just what they do. They're marketing schemes. They want to appeal to children and nostalgia, so they took over that.
was broadcasting their good deeds and morals, their war against children was still in full. This Kit Kat deal was to get activists off Nestle's back, but the rest of their chocolate wasn't acknowledged at all. So while Nestle was broadcasting their good deeds and morals, their war against children was still in full swing. In 2016, it was estimated that over 2 million children were now working in the cocoa industry. But for Nestle, it seemed like the problem had all gone away. Public outrage started to wane. People got distracted by other issues. No one cared about some distant foreign child slavery, and this meant that Nestle didn't even have to pay lip service anymore. In 2020, they even ended their Kit Kat deal, fully pulling out of fair trade. Instead, Kit Kats are now part of the Rainforest Alliance, because climate change is the issue of today, so it made sense to keep the facade up for an issue people stopped caring about. Which is why today, the problem is just as bad, if not even worse. Nestle still rely on child slavery, and there's no monetary incentive for them to stop, and a lot of greedy reasons to ignore it. And these victories in their war on children have made Nestle almost comfortable in their evil. In 2005, a Nestle CEO said this in an interview when talking about the view that water is a human right. Quote, "That's an extreme solution. The other view says that water is foodstuff like any other, and like any other foodstuff, it should have market value. Of course people pay for water, but to say it's not a right for people to have water is just senseless in its barbarity." And this statement came off the back of years of Nestle siphoning water supplies and causing droughts droughts around the world. In 2018, Nestle funneled 45 million gallons of water from mountain springs in California's Strawberry Creek. And now that countless creeks in the region have run dry, it's obvious who's to blame. And there's just so
Yes.
many countless examples of this around the world. But one of the worst is from Pakistan, when an audit found that Nestle paid pretty much nothing to Pakistan's government for the 4.4 billion liters of water they took. And they went on to waste half of it and bottled the rest. And Nestle bought up so much of Pakistan's fresh water, only then to resell it back to the Pakistani population at a higher price. A price that most people just couldn't afford.
Yeah.
And the water they did sell wasn't even fit for human consumption. So why do governments around the world allow Nestle to do this? Well, after almost a century of these practices, Nestle has become unstoppable in its strategy. They will always exaggerate job opportunities and the money they'll bring to a country. Once they have permission to enter the country, they suck the community dry, bottle the water, and then resell it back to the population, all
Yeah.
at a higher price. Using these tactics, they've made billions. In 2018 alone, Nestle made over $7 billion just from bottled water, and these profits show no sign of stopping. In fact, Nestle's in the middle of a golden age. Over the past 10 years, their stock price has doubled. And to add to the shamelessness of Nestle's evil, they've even gone back to their old baby formula strategies. New tricks such as targeting
Wow.
pregnant women or new mothers with social media posts promoting formula are widespread. And in the developing world, Nestle is still heavily involved in marketing their baby formulas, with formula consumption rapidly growing in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Nestle doesn't really have incentives to play nice anymore. Their war on children shows absolutely no signs of stopping. As long as the profits keep rolling in, they'll continue their evil actions. They're still using slave labor, they're still flaunting the rules in their marketing of baby formula, and they're even still siphoning off water just to bottle and resell it back to an impoverished nation. And the boycotts that seemed so effective in the past are now incredibly hard to organize, because Nestle just owns so many brands and products. It's nearly impossible to keep track of what to avoid. They're so deeply ingrained in modern society that governments, big business, and major investors could never let it fall, which is why nowadays there's not nearly enough pressure on Nestle. And so the future kind of looks grim for children around the world, but
Yeah,
at least
it
it's
does.
bright for Nestle. 2020's catastrophic markets have struck a blow to Nestle, at least temporarily, with Nestle reporting a 19.99% year-on-year reduction in net profit.
Kind of
And it's not just
surprised.
companies hurting, but the everyday people with money in the market. In fact, some are calling the next 10 years the decade of lost wealth, because the near-zero interest rates and sub-2% inflation that fed the record markets are gone, and trillions of dollars have been wiped from the stock market. In their place, volatility and uncertainty reign. So how are ultra-high
Someone
net worth investors
subscribe?
preparing? With an asset that has shown volatility and markets are gone, because the near zero interest rates and sub 2% inflation that fed the record markets are gone, and trillions
Yeah,
of dollars have
someone
been
just
wiped from the
subscribed,
stock
wow.
market. In their place, volatility and uncertainty reign. So how are ultra high net worth investors preparing? With an asset that has shown to reduce volatility in any portfolio, one that 85% of wealth managers recommend, fine art. Because of the demand in these conditions, Deloitte expects the market to grow nearly 60% in just 3 short years. And it's no surprise. Morgan Stanley says this art has a low correlation to other major asset classes, and doesn't experience the same volatility. And so that's where one startup saw an opportunity for every investor to be a part of this movement, and it's called Masterworks, an easy-to-use investment platform that's allowed over 500,000 users to discover the potential of this exclusive wealth-generating asset. Since inception,
Oh, it's a
Masterworks'
sponsor,
team
I
of
didn't
our market
realize.
experts have delivered an average 29% net return to investors. And although past performance is no guarantee of future results, Masterworks is a long-time channel partner with an A+ rating from Better Business Bureau, and you can get exclusive access to Masterworks just by clicking the link in the description below.
Okay. Yeah, so what did I tell you? Nestle is a pure evil company. If you didn't believe me when I first said that, believe it now. I'm not expecting views on this reaction. I'm really not. Because this was October, it came out October 1st. It's now October 25th. I took way too long to record a review. I had a lot going on this month, not just with editing of my Pirates of the Caribbean review. I've been also uploading a lot of shorts, although those don't take up that much of my time, usually. I still work 7 days a week. Um, and 2 weekends ago, my wife and I took a trip down to Los Angeles. Second time going down to LA this year. It's about a 7-hour drive from here, down south. And we had a well, I took her down there to go to Camp LA to watch some K-pop performers, which maybe I might even upload a video or short to talk about how the organizers of Camp LA totally bombed it and screwed up badly because a lot of the performers weren't even able to get in because their visas weren't actually paid for by the organizers. The ones who got in paid for their own visas, or already had like citizenship or something. But after the Camp LA thing, my wife and we went on Hollywood Boulevard and had a nice trip there. We checked out the Wax Museum with very, very lifelike figures of celebrities. Actually, yeah, I'll show you that real quick. I can't show you them all, but um, yeah, Hollywood stars. Um, yeah, scroll down enough though, we'll find yeah, the Wax Museum. There's Zac Efron. There's Danny Trejo, Simon Cowell, Leonardo DiCaprio, George Lopez. These are all the pictures that my wife is in with the wax figures. There's pictures. Oh, here's one of me, actually. I'm right next to Daniel Craig. Let's see. My wife didn't like how I did the pose. Was it really as bad as she said it was? We're gonna find out. We're gonna find out if it's actually as bad as she said it was. I used to be really photogenic, but I don't think it's that bad. I mean, I'm still, holding up the gun. I guess maybe I could have done it a little better, but anyway, there's a lot more. Of course, we have Johnny Depp ones too, because I mean, this channel has has gained like nearly 500 subscribers in the last few months, primarily because of shorts of Johnny Depp. So there's going to be that too. We have some Johnny Depp wax figure pictures. There's one with his character Edward Scissorhands, and there's a barber chair, at the barber shop, and you could sit in that chair and you could wear a wig to dress up like one of the women from the movie. It's really cool. And then there's actually Johnny Depp, just like I think the Dior ads. I think that's the other one. I'm not 100% sure. Um, and yeah, and then this past Sunday, just 2 days ago, we went down to San Rafael. Here in Santa Rosa is in the North Bay. North Bay. We're in the Bay. This is the fifth largest city in the Bay Area. It's the North Bay. It's the largest city of wine country, way more populated than Napa actually. And if we go down south about like 30 to 45 minutes or so, we end up in San Rafael, which is not too far. Which is a pretty short drive to San Francisco from there. But anyways, went to San Rafael, went to Dominican University, and we watched Tom Felton, Draco Malfoy, on stage. He was answering questions, not just about his book, but about like his life in general and what's been going on. It was really cool, and we got free copies of his new book, and as well as a little thing with his autograph on it. So really neat. Anyways, I actually have a short of that and a video of that uploaded. There'll be some more of those to come. I didn't record the whole interview. That was like an hour long. Would have killed the battery in my phone if I did that. But anyway, so I've had a lot going on. So that's why I hadn't recorded this reaction. I wish I did a lot sooner, back on October 1st, and I do apologize for that. There's going to be some editing on this, but I'll try to get it done as quickly as possible. I only plan to edit out when my wife interrupted me. We were talking about the unfortunate, very serious situation we are dealing with these apartments that I'm not going to get into in a video, or at least in a video that's not related to it. Anyway, what'd you think about this video by Moon? What'd you think about what he had to say? And yeah, what do you think about Nestle now, huh? I don't care how tasty their chocolates are. I used to eat lean pockets. Yeah, actually, it's funny. I preferred lean pockets over hot pockets for some reason. Like I had lean pockets a lot, which was good of my mom to do so before we knew about how awful Nestle is. But the lean pockets, they're more healthy than the hot pockets, obviously. And I enjoyed them a lot more than Hot Pockets. I tried Hot Pockets a little later than that, because this is, I think, when we had the Lean Pockets. We had them throughout the 2000s. I know that. Might have had them in the late 90s. Anyways, I tried Hot Pockets later and I found that I actually preferred the Lean Pockets. I don't know what it is, but something they did to make them, I thought it tasted better than the Hot Pockets. Odd, but whatever. Anyways, um, but yeah, nowadays, so yeah, I'll admit, like I've enjoyed Nestle products. I've never bothered with their water, but then again, I don't see much purpose of buying bottled water. Right here in our kitchen, we have a filter from the sink faucet that will do filtered water, and I just pour it in my own bottle that I carry with me. You know, so not to mention, if I go to Target with that same bottle, they have one of those things that fill your water bottle right by the drinking fountains there, right by the bathroom. Every tar- I don't know if every Target has that, but a lot of them do. So, and I could also, some libraries have that same exact thing as well. So, a bunch of free water. For water should be free. You shouldn't have to buy it. Um, like one thing that's annoying, like I'll go to the store and I'll see sparkling water, flavored water that has aspartame, artificial sweetener, to make it taste better, and it adds like fruit flavors like tangerine lime or pineapple coconut, stuff like that, and they taste pretty damn good. It has artificial sweetener, but that's not as bad for you as like high fructose corn syrup or straight up sugar. But anyway, you don't want to have too much of that either. Usually those are like $1 or less at the store, right? Then I see these regular, just plain out, just bottled water, and it's like $2, $3. Like what? And then I see those long bottles of Smart Water. It's like $4. I'm like, Smart Water, $4? I'm sorry, you'd have to be stupid to buy water for four goddamn dollars. Like what the fuck? Seriously? Like why are there so many waters, and why does it cost that much money to buy? Like why is it more expensive to buy just plain out water than it is to buy sparkling water? I feel like it would take a lot more effort to make the water, put the fruit flavor in there, harvest the actual fruits that make that flavor, put the aspartame in there. Like I feel like that'd take a lot more effort than just, filtering the water and putting it in a bottle. Like I feel like that would take way more effort. Yet it costs less. Like I just don't get it. Anyway, um, life's full of some weird mysteries, but it's no mystery. That Nestle is an evil company. Um, anyways, I would like to mention something. As a matter of fact, I'll do a comment on this later. Yeah, see, here's another one from Moon. This one just came out, and he said that the Joker, the one from 2019, has a hidden warning. I look forward to checking that out. Won't do a reaction though, but I'll check it out. There's that Mark Zuckerberg one. Little underrated actually uploaded his own reaction to this video 10 days ago. It has no views. Search this, click it, watch it. Give it some views. Let him know I sent you. Oh, wait, what am I doing? I'm an idiot. Jesus Christ.
Of this war. From Nestle convinced
Yeah, so
Masterworks is a long-time channel
there's
partner with an A+ rating from Better.
so yeah, there's some other videos from Moon UK. There's a hidden warning from the Joker. Um, yeah, there's Mark Zuckerberg right there. Yeah, so there's a lot of videos from here, and he mentioned Uber. I actually watched that one. There's one thing he says in that video I disagree with, which is about Prop 22. Prop 22 was great. It wasn't just, the gigs that want it, but the people who work these gigs want it because they don't want to have to work hourly wages. Um, I'm gonna watch that Watch Mojo video sometime because they don't want to work hourly wages that are probably minimum wage and work scheduled hours as opposed to, you know, most people who do the gig work like Uber, DoorDash is me. Um, they set their own schedule, want to work a time that's convenient to them, and often do it as a second job. But for those who do it full time, which I am one of them, I want to be able to work the schedule I want, but also be able to get paid more for working better. If I'm paid hourly, I'm paid the same regardless of how good or bad I do the job. If I am quick at doing the job, I get paid more frequently, more faster, because I get paid per order. Anyways, the Uber one is very interesting, though. I agree with pretty much almost everything else, almost, but disagree with that thing he said. Anyways, what I was trying to briefly say was this other channel, a little underrated. He's a much smaller channel than mine. I mean, my channel's small with just under with around 23, 45 subscribers, but oh, 2, 3, 4, 5. How about that? Anyways, um, but his is even smaller, and his he uploaded that video 10 days ago, and it has no views. So why don't you give it a watch and comment that I sent you that way? Nestle's Warren Children. Click this one. Comment Slidey 8 for I sent you. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Didn't mean to make this as long as it was. I appreciate it. I don't expect very many views in this video anyways. I just wanted to upload because I thought it was something really important because of how I've been saying for years that Nestle's an evil company, but people just aren't really listening to me. But yeah, there's the proof right there.